Nancy Pelosi is a congresswoman. She beats the market very consistently. She's very good. We have a pack called the Nancy Pelosi strategy, right? We mirror her portfolio as close as possible. And when she makes a change, then your pack also reflects the change.
What is the typical return of Nancy Pelosi? Do you know?
If the market for the last 3 years has done about 25% in the last 3 years, I think she's done like.
So hari ini gue kedatangan Bro Jesse. Beliau ini co-CEO-nya Reku ya. Dan mungkin teman-teman banyak yang kenal dia sebagai suaminya Maudy Ayunda. Udah terkenal ya, jauh lebih terkenal daripada gue. Tapi beliau ini orang Amerika ya, bukan orang Indonesia. Jadi dia nggak bisa bahasa Indonesia, makanya podcastnya. Why are you laughing? Can you actually understand what I say?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, you can? Okay. Jadi podcastnya ini bakal pakai bahasa Inggris ya. Gue nanti taruh subtitlenya aja. Cuman gue nggak tahu dia bisa ngerti. Untung gue nggak jelek-jelekin dia. Kalau misalnya jelek-jelekin ketahuan. Okay, so Jesse, the number 1 and number 2 cause of marital issues are infidelity and financial problems, right? I think this is true everywhere, be it for celebrities or us regular people, or in the US or Indonesia or other parts of the world. I mean, you married a celebrity, so I would love to get your point of view on that, and also other topics, including the US stock, crypto, and the current economical situation.
Yeah.
So let me start. Do you think a husband or a wife must marry someone with a similar view on managing their finances before they get married?
You know, I think the short answer is yes. You know, you mentioned infidelity and financial are the 2 reasons, right? As most common for why people break up. I think like if you think about infidelity, of course you have to be aligned in terms of what is the definition of infidelity, what is each partner allowed to do and not. But the same thing with finances. I think you have to be aligned at the end of the day. You have to be clear in terms of how are you going to share the finances, how you're going to spend, how are you going to be transparent about the finances. I think if you don't do that and you don't align on what is the definition of being aligned financially, and it's just kind of the same thing as not aligning on what is the definition of infidelity, right? Oh, I didn't know I was cheating. I was just, right? For example.
I was just texting. I was just like,
whatever,
just meeting up, just having dinner between two.
Yeah, of course, for some people it's okay. Some people it's not okay. You have to align on that. So I think similarly, you kind of have to align on the financial. If you guys are, I think, completely different and then you get married, I feel like there's a lot of risk, right? And like you said, it's the number 1 reason or top 2 reason. So yeah, at least, I think at least you should be aligned.
Yeah. Would you say you and Maudy had a very similar view on finance? And if not, like what are some of the differences that you guys had?
Yeah, I think overall very similar, actually. We both, I think, we understand the power of money in terms of if it's used well, it can be very powerful and it can kind of help both of you guys achieve the life that you want. If it's used poorly, it can turn into a weapon and it can be this source of conflict and whatever. So I think for us, we luckily we're actually very, very aligned in terms of how we see money, manage money, invest money, whatever it is. So yeah, luckily for us, it's been good.
Does that include like your style of saving and also spending? Are you guys both of you like typically more towards the frugal side or spending side or different in that sense?
No, we're both actually quite frugal, believe it or not.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah. We almost never spend. Our biggest spend by far is our rent for our place that we live. We really don't spend on very much beyond that. If we do, if there's something big, let's say if we're moving and we need to decide on where to move because the rent is different, or I don't know, if we need to buy a car, for example, or whatever. Of course, we will discuss that. But I think for us, because we're both very frugal, we have very little spend. Actually, the management of the money is very easy. Like we're very lucky, no conflict ever, and stuff like that. I think to be fair, she is a little bit more willing to spend than I am historically. Like she for example, she'll have like handbags, right? I don't really understand why do women have more than 1 bag, right? just something to hold your thing, right? So I think historically she's been a little bit more spendy, but especially nowadays, recently, yeah, we're both very frugal, actually.
Yeah, because especially, I think, I mean, I've known you for quite a while now, and I think you and I have sort of like a similar, style on how to spend. Like we don't really want to spend on things that we don't need, and we really think about our spending, right?
Sure.
But I mean, from the celebrities that I know, many of them have this expectation that they need to show certain level of luxury and wealth, right? Wouldn't you have any of those conflict, or do you think that's not true for your case?
for her, I think that she might have felt that way before. When she was younger, I believe she felt like that more. And in the early part of our relationship, actually, she was kind of more like that. Now, over time, I think a combination of me influencing her, but also her maturing, I think she's realized she doesn't have to play that game, or she doesn't have to look a certain way. And for her, I think for her, luckily, if she has partnerships with brands or whatever, they provide her. They're also incentivized to make sure she looks good, or she's wearing the whatever. So it kind of figures it out by itself, you know what I mean? Like, she herself doesn't have to go out and buy all these luxury things and do that. But I know what you mean. Like, I think a lot of people need to put up that certain image, and a lot of people, especially maybe, you know, kind of in those types of circles, they like to spend on luxury things and whatever. But Maudy, yeah, for me, very luckily, Maudy really doesn't do much of that. And she's very frugal, yeah, so it's great.
Very interesting, very interesting. So what about your investment philosophy? Like, has it been the same between how you and Maudy invest?
So I think it's different. There's two main differences. One is in terms of like the things that we like to invest in. I like to invest in things like crypto, stocks, bonds, what the kind of the typical things that you can do from your computer. Maudy is actually much bigger into real estate. Like, she's a big believer in real estate as an investment. So that's kind of like one big difference. The second big difference is I'm like a very big believer in diversification. I think maybe it's a function of the types of things that I'm investing in. Whereas I think for Maudy, she, maybe rightfully so, she believes like if you have a lot of conviction, and if you're trying to make a lot of return from one thing, you need to be focused on that one thing that you're really good at. And for her, that might be real estate, something like that. So we have those differences. But I think one similarity that we have is we really don't like seeing our money sit in the bank. You know, we like to have our money work for us, right? So I think we're both very much, like, we're on the same page in terms of how much we want to invest, for example. You know, so I think that in that way, we're quite aligned.
So, like, the interesting thing is when I asked you just now whether or not you guys had a similar view on investment, you mentioned yes, right? You're quite similar in that sense. But you also have a lot of differences. Right. Like, for example, your investment style, you like to invest in the stuff that you can do over your phone or computer, while Maudy likes real estate. Or even your spending habits, or Maudy's spending habits, she typically spends more for certain maybe luxury goods at the beginning, right? Which is like there were some differences then, right? So what was the things that were similar or the same between two of you that had stayed true since you met her?
Yeah. I think, like one being we both want to be investing. That's a big thing. Like, I think if one person is very comfortable putting it in the bank and they just want to put it, you know, they just want to earn the interest on a bank. Like, my parents are like that. They're like scared of investing in general. They want to put it in the bank to be safe. Whereas I think for both me and Maudy, we're both a little bit more willing to invest. Yeah, number one. And then number two, I think both of us kind of recognize that that if you want to invest or if you want to manage money or whatever, it has to make sense. Like, we're both very logical about it. You know, I think we both really don't like to waste money. We don't like to spend, exactly like you said, we don't like to spend on things that are just liability, you know, and then you buy something and it depreciates, and that's not what we want to do. If for her, for example, if she's going to buy something that's luxury, it needs to serve a purpose. It needs to be because I need it for this campaign that I'm doing, or I need it because I need to fit in with this crowd or whatever it might be. So everything that she does, I think there's kind of a logical asset-based approach to it as well.
That's interesting. I mean?
Yeah, so maybe it's a little nerdy or like a little deep, but that's kind of, I think both of us are quite logical in that way. In terms of the details, it's a little bit different, right? Like the things that we invest in or the things that we like to buy or whatever, the little things are different, but the main things are actually quite...
How do you, both of you, decide on how much money to spend? Let's say you have this amount of money, right? Who then decides, okay, this time I'm going to be buying property, or this time, you know, you believe Trump will win, right? Or maybe, right? I'm just saying. Sure, yeah. So you prefer to put in crypto. So who decides, and how do you guys go about it?
We decide by basically we take whichever portion is our strong suit. So when it comes to real estate decisions, for example, she will take a lot of the lead. And she will kind of have a point of view on what's good or where she wants to invest or whatever. And she has help from other people, including her parents, who are kind of in this space and blah, blah, blah. And then in terms of, okay, actually pulling the trigger or signing the thing or spending that money, of course, we'll decide together. So in terms of the actual spending decisions, all of it is done together. But the nitty gritty is kind of, I leave it to her. If she's going to find like, she wants to invest because she thinks this is a good opportunity, okay. For me, if I'm telling her, hey, I think Bitcoin right now is a good opportunity, buying opportunity, she says, okay. But then the final decision of when we're actually spending the money, we do it together. Like yeah.
Interesting. Do you think, because both of you and Maudy have successful careers, right, in your own rights, do you think people who are more well off tend to have an easier marriage in terms of, you know, because when they're better off and when they have money, means, quote unquote, there is no financial issues, right? Do you think it's true?
You know, I think it really depends. I think if you're aligned, if the two of you kind of see pretty close to eye, then I think, like you said, having more makes things a lot easier, yeah? Like you don't have to, you know, for example, if you're not budgeting on a day-to-day basis and you have a little bit more room to play with and a little bit more disposable income, great. Then you know exactly, the two of you know what to do with it, and it's just more flexibility. But I think if the two of you guys are misaligned, then having more is just like more conflict, right? More things to disagree about, more things to argue about. So I think it really depends on how aligned you are. And I think I've seen both situations, right? I've seen a situation where someone had very, you know, not as much disposable income, but they're very aligned. And so they're very like clear on the budgeting. They know exactly where they're spending and they're very disciplined, and that works out. And then there's other situations where two people get together, they both come from wealthy families, for example, but they never really bothered to really, you know, get aligned financially. And then every little decision becomes like a mini battle, and the finances become a big point of dissatisfaction in their life. So yeah, I think the most important thing is really just alignment. After that, more is better. But if you're not aligned, then more is worse.
Interesting. When did you start talking about finances? I mean, before you, I'm talking about before you got married to Maudy. Like when? Like was it like 6 months after dating, or when you date, or before marriage, or when should it be?
For us, we spoke about it pretty early. I want to say like definitely within the first 3 months, because I think I'm a big believer, as you know, that, you know, managing your finances well is very important. And like you said, it's a very big source of dissatisfaction between relationships. So of course you need to get it out of the way. There's got to be these big things. So we definitely had that conversation very early. I think for the average person, or for the, you know, for other people, I would recommend a similar thing. I would recommend talking about it very early, because yeah, anyway, it's a very good weeding function. And not only that, I think it's quite easy to kind of like maybe, if it's not top of mind for both parties, then I think it's easy to kind of just like dismiss it, because you don't really know, right? If you're dating someone, you don't really know how they're spending their money, or what their point of view on money is, or, you know, how much they're planning on saving for their future. But you don't really know those things early on. So you have to be intentional about talking about those things early, you know? So yeah, I think earlier is better.
Interesting. And also, I think the interesting part about you is, I think majority of Indonesians would love to have the opportunity to work in the US, right?
Sure.
Or the best thing would be working in the US, making our money there, and then living here, like remote work, right? But you're different. You're the opposite side. You're an American who works in Indonesia, which I think is like probably the 0.00x% of people who work out there. What do you think is the biggest difference working in Indonesia versus your experience in the US?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. But maybe I'll just talk about a few things that come to mind. I think one is the way that organizational structures work. I think here it's like quite hierarchical. Like the boss is the boss, and everyone expects the boss to be the boss, as in they can do, you know, they can spend their time however they want. They make the final decision on everything. Like you have to listen to the boss. And, you know, disagreement is not so acceptable here, maybe. Whereas and this is just general, right? Of course, just general. Every situation is different. Whereas in the US, it's a little bit more democratic. For me, for example, when I had a personal relationship with a lot of my bosses who are like big time people, who are like industry leaders globally, and you know, some of these guys are like billionaires. Like they're very big time people. But I had a personal relationship with them. I had their personal phone number. I can disagree with them anytime I want. For example, there's no word like but or whatever, right? So there's no kind of like separation of the. So in that way, it's much less hierarchical in the U.S. in general, and it's a little bit more maybe democratic or diplomatic in terms of the way decisions are made and what you can say or cannot say to the boss like that. So I think that's one difference. A second thing is here very much more so than in the US, it's about like who you know, right? Sometimes the winning company is not the one that has the best product. Sometimes it's the one that knows the most people or knows the most people in the right places, things like that. And if you're in a position of influence where you can influence regulations a little bit, to your favor, or you can get this person to help you connect you to your first few clients or whatever it might be, like the who you know is supremely important here. Whereas in the US, I think the market is a little bit more efficient in that way. It's a little bit less about the people and it's more about, what value are you bringing or what is your product or whatever it might be.
So how is it, how's your experience in Reku then? Because I understand you having that experience, you may prefer your company to be less of, hierarchical kind of thing, right? And I don't believe people call you Pak Jesse, right?
No one calls me Pak Jesse. They're not allowed to. Yeah.
They're not allowed to.
No, yeah.
Yeah. But can the people actually adapt? Like, can your circle or your team members have that kind of personal relationship with you, or do you think there's sort of like a mental block or something that's blocking? They are more reluctant to actually ask for your phone number or have dinner or lunch meeting with you or whatever.
Yeah, both. There's some people who can make that jump. Well, there's some people who are already naturally like that because they were Western educated or whatever, right? Similar culture. There's people who I can see them trying and they are able to become a little bit more comfortable. And then there's people who I've worked with who never make that jump, who can never see me as, not a friend, but at least a human on the other side who cares about them, whatever. They always see me as kind of the distant boss who they can never disagree with and their job is to make my life easy. No, it's not like that, right? I want this to be a team where we all have input together. But I understand that it's hard. But yeah, there are definitely a portion of people who cannot make that transition.
Yeah. So what has been the most difficult thing moving to Indonesia?
Most difficult thing?
Yeah.
I think there's a few, but I think I would say maybe one is on the communication side. The communication style is very interlinked with the country and the culture and all these things between people. And the communication style, I think, is one of the hardest. So, so for context, again, in general, in the US, being direct and being concise, these things are valued. And here, it's much more about, okay, are you making sure that you're not pissing someone off? Or are you reading between the lines? Like, they seem happy, but are they actually happy? Or, it's a lot more of this dance, right? And that is a dance I had to learn when I came here. It's really not common in the US at all. And so there's been situations where I've had a conversation with someone and I thought it was 100% friendly, totally fine. And I consider myself a relatively, emotionally intelligent person. It's not like I totally misread situation. But then I found out like 6 months later that I said some small thing and it pissed them off, right? And it's usually when there's a little bit of a social power difference, when they're more high status or something like that, right? Then I have to be a lot more sensitive, right? So there are situations like that that I've really had to think about and be very intentional about. It's not natural,
Probably for a government relationship. I can say he cannot. But for team members, I'm sure it's much easier, right? For it to be direct, and probably they need to adapt to the
Depends
style.
on the team, I think.
Depends on the team. Okay,
right?
interesting.
So if it's someone who's working under me, then I'm allowed to be as direct as possible here, and that's tolerable, right? I can be that way. But if we're talking about my team in terms of, for example, my fellow C-level or my board or my investors, right? Then I have to be very, very careful in general about how to approach that, because there's just that's how I feel. I feel a little bit like it can be going great, but I might say something and I don't even realize, but that one thing kind of changes the feeling that they have. So I have to be quite sensitive to that kind of stuff. So I think that's one. Another thing is just kind of on the business side, I'm an entrepreneur, so understanding the market having a natural intuition of where the opportunity is, where the challenges are, what I as an individual, where am I best suited to win? You know, what problems can I solve that I'm uniquely good at understanding? That's what, you know, being an entrepreneur is. And I think that's always hard coming to a new market. Then I have to kind of relearn everything. I have to redevelop my intuition, all these things. So that's definitely a challenge. And then maybe just the last thing I'll say is just on a personal level, if living in the US, especially if you're an entrepreneur or you're in this tech world or you're in business, you're a small fish in a very big pond. But you're a small fish, like nobody cares about you, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. Here, maybe it's because, you know, we're in Jakarta and the tech world and business world is a little bit smaller. And also maybe because, you know, people recognize me and I'm married to a famous person, whatever. But I don't feel like a very, very small fish in a big pond anymore. I feel like I'm a little bit of a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And so there's more eyes, there's less I can do without people knowing. There's a lot more sensitivity I have to have in general, right? For example, going back to the thing I was talking about, if I had a conversation with you and I accidentally pissed you off a little bit, then 10 other people will know tomorrow. You know, it's that kind of dynamic, right? And so kind of managing that on a personal side is a little bit something I've had to relearn as well.
But how is it in terms of family? Because I don't believe you have any other relatives outside of your wife, right?
Right.
Who is in Indonesia.
Okay. That's right.
Yeah, and how's the language for you? Like, can you actually, how much of if people were to talk maybe like, let's say 10 sentences, how much can you typically understand?
40%, 50%.
That's good enough. So you can actually sort of get a gist of what they're saying.
Gist. I think I can know if they're talking shit about me, you know? But I think, you know, and the general topic, but the specifics, no, I can't.
Yeah. So when we talk bad about Jesse, we should smile. Oh, dia ni kurang ganteng ya, gitu. So you wouldn't know.
That one I know.
Okay. So what has been your biggest lesson then, moving here?
For me, I think I've really learned to like slow down and be patient. Yeah, I think my personality is naturally a little bit impatient. I like to go really fast. I'm a little bit like that, and so when I make certain decisions, I feel like it's always been that way. Like I err towards being direct and fast and making decisions, and and I think here, moving here, like we were talking about, sometimes I don't have that natural intuition, right? I don't really know what I don't know sometimes. There's a lot of things that I'm not fully aware of. And so I think being here, I've really learned to slow down and realize that there's no reason to rush. If you make rush decisions, I think there's a higher chance that it's not the right decision. And generally, even if you do rush, there's no benefit of going that much faster. Better to just slow down, make sure you're understanding everything, and take it one step at a time, kind of like that. So that's more of a personal thing based on my personality that I've had to adjust being here. But I think, overall it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to have learned.
Yeah. Can you share your previous roles and where did you study and where did you work before becoming the co-CEO of Reku?
Yeah. So I'll go all the way back. I grew up in the U.S. I grew up in LA, town outside of LA.
Can you speak Korean?
Yeah, I can.
You can? Okay.
Yeah. Not perfectly.
Yeah.
Not business Korean,
Okay.
But like conversational.
Conversational.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a little bit of an accent. Still,
okay.
American accent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I grew up basically my whole life in the U.S. And then for undergrad, I went to Columbia in New York. So I spent 4 years in New York. Really wonderful time. And then after I graduated, I did management consulting at Bain Company in San Francisco. Did that for 3 years. I worked at a startup for just a short period of time called Thumbtack, also in San Francisco. And then the next 3 years after that, I worked in private equity at Bain Capital in Boston. So most of my career before I moved to Indonesia has been kind of around consulting, and then more after that on the investing private equity side. And then after I did 3 years there, then I moved back to San Francisco or Bay Area. I went to business school at Stanford. And then at business school at Stanford is when I met Maudy. So we met there, blah, blah, blah. And then after we graduated, we were deciding, where do we want to be? And at that point, I kind of already knew I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. She is from Jakarta. I'm from here. At some point, I don't know exactly how the time's going to split, but at some point I'm going to live there, and at some point maybe she's going to live in the US. And I figured that, yeah, doing Jakarta early, the first, let's say we're going to be together for 60 years, the next 30, I think easier to do it in Jakarta than doing Jakarta when I'm an old man, right? And of course she wanted to be back here and all that. So yeah, so that's when we decided to make the move.
So do you guys plan to return to the US?
No particular plans right now, I would say. As in, who knows, maybe after 10 years or whatever. I cannot plan that far out.
Yeah.
But at least for the near-term future, no, we're here. I mean,
Interesting.
This is where we are, yeah.
What was your family's reaction when you said you're going to be moving to Indonesia? Or did they say, like, what is Indonesia? Like, where's Indonesia? What country is that?
Yeah. No, Koreans love Indonesia. Especially they love Bali, you know?
Oh, yeah. So, tell us about your experience in Columbia and Stanford. Ini kalau misalnya teman-teman nggak tahu ya, Columbia itu sama Stanford, ya basically Stanford lah ya, kalau misalnya buat masters itu one of the best business schools lah di luar sana. So, what are the things that you learned in Columbia and Stanford that you can share to us who don't have the privilege to go there?
Well, I mean, first, so many things, yeah, but maybe just to highlight a couple things. I think at college, in Columbia, I really learned to really question everything, you know, like really why do certain things work the way that they work? Why is the world built in this way or whatever? Why is, you know, and not settling for that's just how it is, you know? Like, I think it really trained me to have a curiosity and to really keep asking why and digging and seeing if there's a way to, not just accept what the world is, but make my own impact or improve it or whatever. So I feel like maybe that's a little bit high level or philosophical, but that's kind of what I feel like I learned the most from undergrad. And then from Stanford, the main thing that I learned really was taking risk. And I think before going to business school, I always saw risk as like, you're taking the risk because you want to shoot for like a higher reward after, right? Or because you want to achieve something big, you must take that risk, and it's a cost to hopefully achieving that thing. But I actually started thinking about risk as more like, if you never take risks, or if you construct a portfolio, right, and you only do non-risky things, then that's not a very good portfolio. Just like in life, if you live your whole life but you don't take risks and you don't diversify, sometimes you take risks, sometimes you don't take risks, then it's not a very fulfilling or interesting or even an optimal life. So I started seeing risk as more like an asset, or like a blessing that we have, that we're allowed to take like that, or that we should take more of. But I think that was kind of the main thing that I learned in business school.
What about at work, like in private equity, where you worked?
Yeah, at work, I think the main takeaway I really had was actually surrounding yourself with really good people. Maybe it sounds a little obvious, but I think I've been quite fortunate in my career so far to have really surrounded myself with some of the best minds of that industry globally, and it just makes a huge difference in terms of how the growth that you have, but also the way that you see yourself, your own self-confidence, the way that you learn to see the world, and of course the connections and things like that too. So I would say that's kind of one of the main things that I felt was super important when I worked.
Do you think that has already impacted, like, in terms of your financial success, or do you think that's more of a mindset thing? Like, if you surround yourself with the right people, then you can have like a good mindset on how you can do things, right?
Yeah.
Or is it more of like, oh, you are surrounded by these people, therefore you can have the connection to get this deal?
No, more the first one. I think it's more of a mindset thing, yeah, for sure. And I think it's, again, I think it sounds obvious, but it's not something that people are very intentional about. I don't think people are intentionally sitting there and thinking, who are the 5 closest people to me, and how do I make sure that my team around me is the best possible team, right? Not a lot of people think that way. I'm not saying you have to, but I think when it comes to professional, making sure you're, the person that you're talking to every single day for 3 hours a day, you have to make sure that that person is someone that you really respect, that you really trust, that you feel like you can learn from. If not, then, 1%, 1%, then you're going in a different direction. And so I think, at least early in the career, being really intentional about who you're learning from, who you're surrounding yourself with, I think is actually probably the single most important. early career thing.
So I'll assume that's how you pick your team as well, right?
Here.
Like, yeah,
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Like, so what are the criteria? Because I'm sure when people start their career, they would like to go up the ladder, and getting to the circle of the CEO, of the boss, is like the peak of the career, right? Typically. So how do you choose your team? Like, what are certain characteristics that you see, and what are certain characteristics that you would never take? Like, if this person has that.
I think you're talking about my leadership team,
Yeah,
right? Not
yeah.
like the lower than that.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about the leadership team, I think the thing that I care most about, number one, is vision. Do they have a vision or not? Because a lot of times, if I'm choosing to work with someone, I'm choosing to invest in what vision they have for my company, right? Because I cannot tell them exactly what to do every single time. I have to trust their own path that they see that they want to make in this company. So do they have a clear vision that is thoughtful, that is well-balanced, that is et cetera, right? So I think that's super important. And I think most people, that's where it gets cut. A lot of people, they have the skills or they have the energy or the attitude, but I don't know if I see that they have this like drive to create this vision and to drive the company in a way that they're proud of and everyone's proud of. You know what I mean?
How do you assess that? How do you assess someone who has a vision or have the drive before they join your leadership core team?
Yeah, I think you can feel it out in every little place. But for example, if you give, let's say for part of the interview program or process, you give a case study, and the case study is very explicitly testing that. Like, what is your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year vision for the company, right? You can get a sense. But I think for me, the best way is when I talk to them and I look at them and we're speaking face to face and I'm asking them about what is their past experience, right? What's changes that you've made just because you wanted to? What are things that you were unhappy with your last company, and what did you do about it? And did you have that drive to make your vision come to life? I think it's actually very obvious once you start looking for it, if people have it or they don't.
Do you think it's obvious on day zero when you actually interview the person? Or do you think when you interview, you can already tell maybe like 50-50, but after that, you have to test it out during the work experience?
Like that. Yeah,
okay.
Like that.
So both combination of both.
Yeah. Because I think we can sit here and say, oh, I'm the perfect interviewer, but I'm not. I think I'm a pretty not so good interviewer, to be honest. But what I am good at is sitting with that person, like you said, for 3 months or whatever, and really working with them and just really understanding the way their mind works and their motivations and things like that. And then, yeah, it takes some time, but definitely a combination of both. Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that you value is vision.
Yeah.
Other things?
I think the second thing that I find most valuable is attitude. It's kind of similar in a lot of ways, but does this person have like an ownership mentality? Does this person have a good attitude? Are they thinking about their job as, I don't care about it, it's a 9 to 5, I get paid, and if it's this job or it's that job, it's all the same. I don't like that kind of very complacent attitude. I like someone who really applies himself, who believes like the harder I try and the more results I get is good for me too. Not just good for the company, but they just have this belief that owning more and doing more is good for everyone. I think that attitude is very important.
Yeah. I guess those two are any other qualities that you look for, or red flags that you typically identify that this cannot be inside your leadership team?
I think the red flag, the biggest red flag that I feel is when people don't really listen, and it's not that they're like, yeah, I'm ignoring you, not like that. But if you tell them something, how many times do you have to tell them before they like fully understand it? Or are they willing to listen and then really turn it over in their head and think about it? I think there's a big difference in that type of person. And I think someone who doesn't listen or has a harder time listening, I think it shows that, yeah, they're a little bit maybe less willing to be thoughtful. Maybe they're a little bit more stubborn or less willing to be a team player. Several things. So I think that's kind of the main one that I can think of.
So is Reku your first company in Indonesia?
Technically, so before Reku, I actually worked at a local venture firm called AC Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence. It's like a part-time thing. So I didn't have like a full scope, but I was involved there. So I did the entrepreneur in residence with AC because I wanted to understand the Indonesian landscape, meet as many people as possible, meet as many companies as possible. So I did that, and then Reku.
Would you recommend undergrads who just graduated to actually start working in PE or VC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great. I think it's a great learning. I will say, if you're an undergrad or first job and you join because you're hoping to go all the way to the top, then I think VC or PE is one of those jobs that's probably better to, maybe you can start your career, but you do something in between, you do something else where you have real operating experience. If you're a VC, for example, then put yourself in the shoes of someone who actually operates a company or has started a company or whatever. And then you can come back to VC. So I think that those are not maybe great, like beginning to end careers, you know what I mean? Like if you're a doctor from beginning to end. But VC, I don't think is really like that, but I think it's a great place to start and potentially a great place to end too.
Yep. Yeah. So how's your experience running Reku? I mean, I'm asking that question in terms of the point of view of the investor, right? What is the common mistake investors make in Reku that you typically identify?
I think, the most common mistake, I guess, if we're defining mistake as what do they do? Probably. Yeah, what do they do that does not maximize their gain, right?
Yeah.
I think generally people are they buy the hype and then they sell low, right? I mean, that's the only way you can lose money is if you're buying higher than you're selling. But it is common. I think people, like, our volumes go up a lot. Our buying volume goes up a lot when the market is rallying, right? And the sell volume goes up a lot when the market is coming down, right? So it's the exact opposite of what you want. So that's overarching. That's, I think, the main problem that most like personal investors have in general, right? It's like that.
Do you think that's true in the US as well? Or do you think that's uniquely Indonesia?
No, everywhere.
It's the same. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Because my hypothesis is that, if I'll say this quite a bit in public, like if there's an offer to buy an iPhone for 20 million, and then if the offer says 15, we'll be lining up to buy 15 million iPhones, right? But for, let's say, Bitcoin, if it is like 75K, and then people are lining up to buy it, if it is 63K, people are scared to buy it. Yeah. For it's like, totally doesn't make sense. And I always assume it as Indonesia being the less mature country in investment, that is the reason why we have that mentality. But surprisingly, what you're saying is even in developed countries, that's sort of the same too.
Definitely.
Interesting.
It's human psychology. I mean, in fact, if you thought about it, the only reasons assets prices go up or down is because it goes up. There's more buying volume as it goes up, so it keeps going up. And then when it goes down, there's more sell volume, so it goes down, right? If everyone was 100% rational, like you, and they know exactly what the price is, then the prices would be completely constant, right? But that's not the case. Every market has ups and downs. I think that's human psychology. But I will say one difference is for example, in a more developed market, more financially literacy developed market, I think things like, what we call DCA here, right? Just constantly putting in, is much more readily accepted and much more common as an investing practice. And I would go so far as to say, when it comes to things like US stocks, equities, most of the flow is kind of on a more DCA type basis.
In Indonesia, you mean?
In the US.
In the US, okay.
Because a lot of it, most of their investment comes from their pension fund or whatever, right? And that's quite regular. Whereas here, I think a lot of the volume is not because of a DCA behind it, but it's because of a lot of fluctuation. So there's small differences, but yeah.
What's your thought on that? Do people typically make more money by doing DCA or by them investing and deciding when to buy?
Depends on the market, yeah. Depends on which
Over the long run, let's say in crypto, let's say in Bitcoin or the US index.
Yeah. I think if you're talking about like the US, for example, there's been a lot of studies around passive investing, which is just parking it in ETF or several ETFs and just DCA and then let your portfolio run versus picking, active asset picking, right? And the studies all conclude that a passive approach is better. I mean, it generates better return. Not only are you saving time because you're just putting it in one thing and go, but you cannot, as an individual stock picker, hard to beat the market. Now, I think it depends. If you're good, it's just like anything. If you're actually good at it, then of course you can beat the market, but some markets it's easier to be good and harder to be good. In U.S. stock market, it's quite hard to be good, right? But I believe in something like crypto, which is still a little bit less mature. There's more opportunity. So if you are a full-time trader, it's a little bit easier and more opportunity for you to get more upside by being an active picker. So, but it depends on your skill. It depends on what asset class. It depends on how much time you have, etc.
Yeah. Do you think because if we talk about us buying low and trying to sell high, I think that kind of mentality only works if the asset can continually go up in terms of fundamental value, right? Okay. So we can have that mindset. And but also on the flip side, there are assets that typically go down and will never come back, like certain altcoins, for example, or certain stocks that are not really doing well, and the revenue tends to go down year on year. Do you think the mistake is on people who, let's say, buy Bitcoin, like the typical stuffs, so-called like safer, like for example SPY, QQQ, Bitcoin, but they become fearful when the price goes down and they become greedy when the price goes up? Or do you think the problem is more on the other side, which is they actually they already chose the wrong stock or altcoin and they keep on investing? Which one is it? Is the typical or more common issue?
What we see as more common is the first one. Yeah, of course you can pick the wrong thing that goes down forever. Yeah, but there's not that many of those in this world, right? I mean, generally things are priced relatively fairly, and then there is ups and downs. But yeah, generally speaking, the bigger mistake that we see based on the data that we have on our platform, but also from my past experience, is that, yeah, people are a little bit too driven by fear, or, they're a little bit too emotional, and they sell at the wrong time. They sell when it's low, when they shouldn't. That's when they should be buying. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So what's your thought? So as we record, President Trump is not officially the winner yet, but it's 98% winning. Yeah. He's getting there, and Bitcoin, as we record, is at 75K. What's your view on Trump winning to the potential prospects of both Bitcoin and also the US stock market?
Yeah, well, Trump has been pro-crypto for the last 2 years or so, right? His rhetoric has been pro-crypto. So I think the markets are all reacting to that, right? Like today it went up 9% or 10%, whatever. So the markets are reacting to that. Now, in terms of specific policies, I don't think Trump has anything specific yet. But at least he has the positive rhetoric. Whereas I think Kamala Harris, on the other side, she was also loosely positive crypto, but not as positive in terms of the way that she talked about crypto. So I think that there will be a short-term benefit. Also, when it comes to the equity side, or more macroeconomically, there's been one of the clear differences and one of the biggest differences in policy between Trump and Harris has been, Trump is like, I want to cut the tax, I want to cut the corporate tax, I want to cut the personal tax, right? He's all about extending his tax cuts. And then Kamala has come out so far to go the other way. I'm going to increase the taxes for the rich. I'm going to increase the corporate tax. So tax is actually one of the issues in this election that was quite a big difference. And you can see that the market is reacting because Trump is projected to win, and so the market's rallying today. So there's definitely a short-term benefit as people price in these lower tax. But I think something that people don't fully realize sometimes is, and I'll give some data. In the last 100 years or so, the economy, as measured by the S&P has performed better with a Democratic president. I think most people assume that it's Republican because Republicans tend to be more, aggressive in terms of their tax cuts, and they're a little bit more pro-small business and things like that, right? But the economy has generally done better under a Democratic president because the Democratic government is more willing to spend, generally. So the government spending is a little bit higher, which boosts the economy. So, and one more thing I'll add, actually, on top of that, the biggest predictor of the S&P return is actually when Congress and the Senate are cross or on opposite side. So one is Democrat and one is Republican. When that happens, that's actually the highest predictor of the best returns in the S&P.
Interesting.
Yeah, because then you have more political stability. It's more locked, right? So they're more willing to do things safely, as opposed to if they're both Democrat, then they'll push, let's say, very pro-Democrat things, maybe the increased tax, whatever. Or if they're both Republican, then they do a lot of things like cut a lot of spending, whatever, which is, it's more drastic, right? So when the two are opposed is when the economy does the best. I think right now we're seeing that it will probably be Republican throughout, right? So in the short term, things that Trump is talking about with the tax cuts and even like the tariffs or things that he's proposing, I think have a clear short-term impact that people are pricing in, but in terms of the very long term, I don't think that if it's Republican or Democrat, I don't think it makes a big difference in general, because there's pros and cons on both sides.
If you're seeing it over the long run.
Right.
I think the ones who are smiling today are crypto holders, Tesla holders. Elon is so close to Donald Trump. He actually gave away $1 million a day.
Yeah, crazy.
But it's genius.
Yeah.
That's genius.
And it worked, right?
And it worked, yeah. And I also understand you recently launched US stock, right? What's your thesis on launching US stock in Indonesia?
Yeah. I think two main things. One is I have a very high level of confidence in the US stock market in general. It's arguably the best performing asset class that you can invest in. The last 100 years, the annual rate has been about 10%. Only about 1 in every 5 years is the market down. 4 out of the 5 years, market's up. So you're making money 80% of the years, and it's over 10% every year. It's a crazy good asset class. And I think having more Indonesians access, and not just access, but understanding and comfort in that asset class is something that I think is very important. And it will really kind of turbocharge a lot of people's wealth management plans. So we want to be Reku wants to be the champion of that. We want to bring this great asset class to have greater access and greater ease and greater comfort in Indonesia. Now, we're not saying that we're not saying that you should put all your money into US stocks, something like that. No, it has a place in your portfolio, just like everything, just like Indo stock, just like crypto, just like mutual fund. But we want to at least make sure people are easing in and becoming more comfortable with the asset class. That's number one, because we believe in the asset class. And two is, in Indonesia specifically, the US stock market is growing a lot. So we saw some of the data in the last 9-ish months. The transaction volume of US stocks in Indonesia roughly tripled.
Interesting.
So it's one of the fastest growing asset classes. Now, it's much smaller than crypto or Indo stock or whatever, but it is growing fast. So we want to make sure that we're early to that game.
I hope I played a role in that. So because
right, yeah.
I'm a big believer in US stock, right? And I've mentioned this quite a couple of times as well. I really dislike the terminology that a lot of these people teach, right? They say low risk is equals to low return, high risk is equals to high return. For me, that's not true. That's not true. I mean, I've shown time and time again, if you invest in mutual fund stocks in Indonesia, reksadana Saham is what we call it.
Yeah.
The returns over the past 5 years is like 2%
right.
a year or 3% a year. It doesn't make sense, right? Why would you take something that is very, very risky for very, very low return? Right? It totally doesn't make sense.
Right.
And it makes much more sense to invest in like SPY or QQQ, in my opinion. And I think actually one of my first video in 2022 November is about US stock. And I've been telling people, US stock. And I think this year has been getting like, 30% or something for QQQ.
Yeah.
And we also get the upside for currency, right? Because Indonesia typically, our rupiah typically depreciate versus the dollar.
Right.
So we get both sides, both the
that's true.
The strengthening of the currency of the US dollar, and also the rallying of the whole US index. Right. So thank you for bringing it to Indonesia.
Thank you. You're doing this world a service. Yeah.
Yeah. But what is your assessment on things? Because I think majority of people obviously use Reku for crypto, right? Do you think the focus is going to be, do you expect the market to be like 50-50, crypto and US stock? Or do you think it's going to be like 70-30 or whatever?
You mean in our business?
Yeah, in Reku.
Yeah. US stock is a baby, right? I mean, this industry in Indonesia is quite young and it's growing fast, but it's still small, I mean, compared to crypto. So for us, we think about the US stock business as a baby. We're taking care of it. We want to give it the care. We want to see it grow. We want it to do well. But in terms of the business, and of course, like you mentioned, the heritage, the history of the company, we're a crypto company, right? Historically, and that's where the expertise is, and that's where our experience is. And so I think the main focus and the biggest size of the company will, of course, come from the crypto side. That will continue to be our main focus. US stock is our like new precious baby that we're trying to grow into.
Yeah. Interesting. So later on, I'd love to ask your assistants to actually do a share screen, so they can tell us like how the new users, we can split it into maybe like 2 categories, right? How the newbies can make money, what is your advice, and also the experts. But that's for a later segment.
Okay.
For the US stock, right? Can people actually transfer USD directly into the app, or must they transfer IDR and then exchange it to USD?
Yeah, we can accept it, although right now that button in the app is in development. I think maybe by the time this video comes out, it'll be available. I'm not 100% sure, but I know it's in development right now. But yeah, we can. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. It's actually very easy. We just have to develop that button.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's good, so people can have the option of transferring USD directly or converting their rupiah, right? Yeah. But there are quite a bit of competitors already, right, in the US stock space. What do you think is the thing that sets you guys apart the most?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one, in terms of some of our features that we have a couple of innovative features that some of our competitors don't have. In our mission of trying to make the US stock market and investing in the US stocks as seamless and as comfortable as possible, we have 2 products. One is what we call packs. It's basically like you can invest in a specific strategy or a specific portfolio, and our feature maintains that portfolio for you. And so if there's changes in the portfolio, for example, we have a pack called the Nancy Pelosi strategy, right? So Nancy Pelosi is a congresswoman, and she's a very avid investor, as you know, and she beats the market very consistently. She's very good, right? We can talk about why, but she's very good. And so we have a pack where we basically we mirror her portfolio as close as possible. And when she makes a change, then your pack also reflects the change.
That's right? Very interesting.
So we have that. So we're trying to make it as easy for you, one click, trying to make it as easy for you to get into like a good portfolio as possible.
Let me just translate this because I think that's very important. So di Amerika itu ada satu orang lah ya di politik namanya Nancy Pelosi gitu. Terus Nancy Pelosi ini returnnya bisa lebih jago daripada Warren Buffett. Teman-teman bisa cek politisi tapi returnnya jago gitu, bisa outperform market terus-terusan. Terus kalau misalnya kenapanya, biasanya sih kalau misalnya orang-orang ngomong itu gara-gara dia tahu apa yang dia bakal tanda tangan gitu. Jadi ada policies yang dia bakal rubah, ya kan, pajaknya ada yang mau naikin atau yang diturunin atau yang mau di-ban, dia tahu duluan, makanya dia bisa keluarin policy-nya, makanya dia bisa beat the market gitu. Lalu ternyata kita tuh bisa ngikutin portonya, copy paste. So how do you guys track Nancy Pelosi's portfolio?
Yeah, so we there's some public sources that we can scrape. All politicians have to disclose what they invest in.
What is the time lag like?
Depends, but usually about a week.
That's interesting.
It's just between when she files, the moment that Nancy Pelosi files, hey, I bought X amount of shares of NVIDIA, for example, she has to submit that to the government, and then that filing is public.
So how frequently does someone need to file?
Depends. Whenever they buy.
Like what's the requirement? Oh, is the requirement whenever they buy?
Whenever they make a change.
Whenever they make a change, they need to file.
Yes.
Either buy or sell.
Yes.
And they have like a lead time of about a week to report.
Yes, roughly.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we can see that. So it depends on how much time between when she buys and when she submits the filing. That's roughly.
What is the typical return of Nancy Pelosi? Do you know?
Oh, I mean, she's been crushing it. She's been, I think, more than double the market.
Wow.
So if the market for the last 3 years has done about 25% in the last 3 years, I think she's done like 40, based on our analysis. We were trying to back create her.
And so there's a button for us to actually simply follow whatever trades that she makes.
Yeah, it's not exactly following, because actually, to be clear, it's not. We don't make the changes for you.
Yeah.
We basically we lay out. Okay, these are all the changes in that portfolio. So we're going to make these changes. Can you approve?
Okay, you know what? Let's do the share screen now.
Okay, let's do it. Sure.
Okay, let's share screen.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, for the packs that we're talking about,
Yeah.
you go to in the stock tab at the bottom, and then in the Discover, there's a section called Reku packs. Yeah. So right now we have 4 Reku packs: U.S. stock starter pack, top tier hedge funds, where you can basically have the portfolio of the hedge funds, Nancy Pelosi, right, that we were talking about, and Harvard. So you can also have Harvard portfolio. So for example, if you go to Nancy Pelosi, yeah, you can see that her, like we were talking about, her 3-year returns like 15% higher than the S&P. She's crushing the market. But yeah, so there's this allocation that you can invest in, and then you're basically investing in her portfolio, more or less. Or we give you the same stock
Percentages, the same portfolio.
Yeah,
That's
same
very
allocation.
interesting.
And then I can't replicate it right now because she doesn't have a change. But basically what would happen is if there is a change, let's say, for example, she sold all of her NVIDIA and she bought Facebook, whatever. Then we give you an alert saying, hey, there's a change to your Nancy Pelosi pack. This is what we're going to do. If you're okay with it, we're going to go minus 100 NVIDIA plus 100 Meta, for example. And then you swipe up, and then that we make those transaction changes for you.
Very interesting.
So it's not that we manage it for you. We still have to let you know. We still have to make sure you're approving of what's happening. But we just make it as easy as possible. One swipe, and you're done.
Yeah, and this change is not necessarily selling one stock to buy one stock, right? It can be like selling 7 stocks to buy 20 others.
Yeah, sure.
Like rebalancing the whole US stock portfolio.
Right.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. We also have it for crypto as well.
Oh,
actually,
okay.
So we have a Reku crypto blue chip one. This is basically this is a little bit more straightforward. This is basically we look at the volumes of those coins, and then we rebalance it based on kind of the volume and the market cap and whatever.
This is just like an index then.
This is more like our personal index, Reku's index of the blue chip, like that.
Yeah.
And then there was I wish I saved it. There was a rebalance that happened earlier today. So I wish I could have showed that mechanic of the swiping. But anyway, you kind of get the point.
Yeah, understood. And then there's a Harvard endowment fund.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this is what the Harvard portfolio looks like. So you can have a portfolio that looks just like Harvard's portfolio, like that. And then the one that actually right now for us is the most popular is actually this U.S. stock starter pack. This is really like, you don't know where you need to invest, right? And you just need to start somewhere. And this is basically, we create a portfolio of ETFs where we give you we have some science behind it. We have a proprietary model, but we basically give you exposure to, all U.S. stocks, and then growth stocks, dividend stocks, international stocks, real estate, bonds, whatever. So we create that allocation of a total portfolio for you. And then we also do rebalancing, things like that.
Interesting. Do you suggest people who are new to U.S. stocks to actually follow the starter packs, or do you suggest them to just buy an ETF? Like, for example, the SPY or the QQQ, which is more advisable?
I think it really, really depends on your strategy, what you're trying to do. If you're trying to, if you have a particular belief that one strategy is what you want to do, let's say, for example, I want to have a similar strategy as Nancy Pelosi, then use our pack. If you want to say, I want to have the most well-balanced portfolio that I possibly can, then you go with our US stock starter pack, like that. But, of course, if you wanted to buy individual stocks, you can absolutely do that. So for example, if I'm in NVIDIA, you can buy this individual stock. But here, what we do actually is we have a unique feature called Insight. So in the Insight tab here, basically, there's 4 key data points that we give to the investor. The first one here is buzz. It's basically one of the things that investors most want to know is there something happening with the stock right now? Because not every stock has something going on. Most times it's just steady, but suddenly something's happening, right? Like, oh, they announced this new big project, or this plant exploded, or whatever, right? So you need to pay attention. So the buzz score, we track the news mentions and the social media mentions to see if there's something buzzing in particular, so that you pay attention. The next one we have is a quality score. This one, basically, this is leveraging a lot of my expertise as an investor, but we basically looked at 5 key pillars of what defines a high quality business inherently, right? And for example, here we're saying the 5 key pillars are profitability, growth, capital allocation, or how you use your cash, your balance sheet health, and the stability of that business as measures of how high quality of this business. And then once you go into that, so for example, I expanded the profitability tab, then you'll see this is how we evaluate. We compare, for example, NVIDIA with other companies in its sector, like semiconductor and semiconductor equipment, and we compare it also against companies in the same size group, so large cap, and then we compare what's their gross margin like. Is it healthier than average? What's their EBITDA margin? Is it better than average? Like that. And then of course we have a proprietary model behind that. But all that leads to kind of a single point where you can say NVIDIA, the inherent quality of this company is an A+, is what we're saying, right? So that's quality. Estimated return, the next one is we take a lot of information and forecasts from a lot of the Wall Street analysts, like from Goldman or JP Morgan or whatever. So we collect them, and they all have a point of view on where the price target is, right? So we track real time how much upside or downside from those price targets do you have. So here it's saying Wall Street analysts expect that for the NVIDIA stock, it should still go up. There's still 8.45% to increase, right? And then the last one, valuation. This is comparing certain key valuation metrics and ratios. Like for example, PE ratio is a very common way to evaluate the valuation of a company, right? Is it overvalued, undervalued, whatever. And in this case, we can see with NVIDIA, across the board, it's very much more premium. So the valuations are higher compared to its peers. So here we tell you it's a premium asset. Some people have some very kind of value-oriented investors. They want to look for companies specifically that are high quality businesses, but are undervalued, right? So then if that's the type of investor you are, you can go directly and say, okay, the quality is an A+, and I want to look for companies with a discount valuation. Yeah. So we give you all of that information to be able to, if you want to be a stock picker, this is the best, these are the best frameworks that we could possibly give you to help you in that journey, like that.
So in terms of your users, are your users mostly picking stocks individually, or do they typically invest in like the ETFs?
For now, actually, the PAX product is actually pretty popular. So there is a good amount of investment going into the PAX. Just one click, I want it to be in
Nancy Pelosi's probably.
This is pretty popular too. The US stock starter pack is the most popular, but Nancy Pelosi is second most popular.
Interesting.
But in terms of the volume, the buy and sell and stuff, it's usually the trades themselves. Yeah. So we have a good mix.
Yeah. Specifically for the PAX, will you be updating more people that we can keep track of their portfolio and we can follow?
If that's the demand, which it seems like there's some interest in that, yeah, we can do that. The infrastructure is all built out, so it's just a matter of finding the reliable sources of, the trades that they're doing.
Yeah, but I guess the limitation would be whether or not they have the obligation to submit to the government, right? Because if not, then we cannot possibly know.
Yeah, as long as we have some public way of getting that information, we can make it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and there's no cost to follow, like no profit sharing, whatever. It's just you guys provide it for free. Yeah, that's, for sure. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think this is the first one in Indonesia. I think. Yeah. Right. I mean, I've never.
But this is what makes us unique. Yeah. These features are what make us.
Yeah. I personally like that feature.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the typical expectation that people can get if they invest in the US stock by following ETF, PAX, or picking individual stocks? Or what do you think will be a good benchmark?
Yeah, I mean, typically, I think more recently, the S&P has gone up about like 8% per year. So I think if you're getting 8% per year on average, I think that's pretty good. That's if you're buying a single ETF like SPY and you're riding it out, that's what you should expect. If you're a stock picker and you're a very good stock picker and you have a lot of time to research and you have certain theses, then of course you can expect more. Just kind of depends on your own style. And yeah.
What is your personal investment strategy? What is your split between? I understand Maudy's real estate, right?
Yeah.
So, well, maybe you can. We. Okay, actually, you know what? Maybe it's okay. What is your overall percentage like?
Of all the different asset classes?
Yeah.
For me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's actually my biggest is in US stock. Probably around, I'm thinking, probably around 40 to 50%.
Wow.
Yeah. And then maybe 30 to 40% crypto, which is mostly BTC, but I actually have a list of stuff, a bunch of different stuff, but primarily the biggest is BTC. And then beyond that, those are by far the two biggest. And then beyond that is mostly like cash and things like that.
Iya. Oh, bakal beli McLaren sebentar lagi nih. Baru pump gara-gara Donald Trump menang. But for crypto, what is your top 3 holdings? Bitcoin is one of them.
BTC, ETH, and I think my third biggest is Solana. Yeah. Solana has done really nicely for me.
Yeah,
because
I
was
think
quite
ETH
early.
has been quite underperforming this year, I think, right? But Solana is doing really good.
Solana's been doing well.
Oh, so you invested in Solana since the beginning, or?
No, I don't know how far back, but yeah, quite early. I mean, several years ago. So I got in pretty early. I was quite lucky. Yeah.
What about for the US stock? What is your top 3 holding?
One, I think the biggest by far is kind of like the SPY. I don't know if that's exact. There's a few versions of the SPY, right?
Yeah.
Like an ETF that tracks the total stock market. That's by far the biggest. My biggest single position is Apple. I've always so I started investing like when I was 19 or 20. So yeah, 15 years ago almost. And the first thing I bought was Apple.
Wow.
And I've ridden that. So the single best performing asset that I have is Apple for sure. That thing has done really well.
How many 1,000% is that right now?
Yeah, I mean,
since 15 years is more than 1,000% for sure.
Probably, yeah. It's done quite well for me, so I've been lucky. So that's my biggest single.
And you have not sold it yet.
Oh, I've sold. I've sold
okay.
along the way.
Oh yeah.
And I've gone in and out and whatever. But that Apple holds a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
That's what got me in, and that's what gave me the returns initially, and that's what got me addicted. And then in terms of the biggest sector, maybe something that is a little bit more unique that people haven't thought about. It's actually I actually have a lot of exposure to uranium. Yeah, uranium. Because I invested about 5 years ago into uranium, but I had this big thesis that the spot price of uranium, which is a commodity, is going to increase. We can go into more deep, but yeah, anyway, there was a mismatch of supply and demand, and I don't think a lot of people knew. So I invested in a lot of like uranium mining companies, and that's worked out really well also.
Interesting. How did you get that thesis? Because I understand you're talking about Apple, or if you're talking about maybe Goldman Sachs in terms of their stock. But uranium, how did you even thought of that as your winning thesis?
Yeah. To be honest, I saw an article on a website somewhere, random article on a website somewhere, something about uranium. I don't exactly remember, and it was not like a well-published. I don't know how I came across it. Maybe a friend sent it to me, something. It's just kind of random. But in it, there was kind of a thesis that, hey, there's a lot of these contracts are expiring. There's a lot of demand for uranium, which is used for nuclear plants and clean energy. And back then there was also a big clean energy wave, right? And so I came across this article, and then I started researching, just digging more. And a lot of it is quite, a lot of things in general are quite public information if you actually look, right? So you can just quickly look. How long is the average contract for mining uranium? Oh, it's 15 years. Okay, well, that's really long. When do these contracts end? Oh, they all end in the next 2 to 3 years. Wow, okay. How much more demand for nuclear plants are there? Oh, wow, the world is planning on doubling the it's all kind of obvious, but you just have to ask the right questions and kind of dig around, and then you can kind of create a thesis around.
Interesting. So I guess that will be the kind of process that investors need to take if their path is to invest in stocks individually, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like you need to look at articles, you need to do your homework, you need to research, you need to be able to know the things that people generally don't know, kind of thing. Then you can get the alpha, kind of thing.
That's one style. It's not the only style.
Okay.
But that's one style. And yeah, you're right. In terms of like getting the alpha, it's not obvious a lot of the times. So sometimes you do have to dig a little bit more, and you have to find the thing that maybe people are overlooking, right?
Yeah.
What is something that people don't fully understand?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you. The first person that I've ever heard in investing in uranium stocks.
It's like 5 years ago.
Yeah. Interesting. So maybe my final question is this, right? So you mentioned historically Democrats tend to do better versus Republicans for the economy and also for the stock market.
Surprisingly. Yeah.
Surprisingly, yeah. But how is it like if you were to combine that information with the rate cut? Because the Fed is expected to continually cut the rates, right? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point. And maybe also to clarify, when we say in general, the economy has done better under Democrats, it definitely does not mean every Democrat outperforms every Republican. Of course, there's Republicans that outperform Democrats. And a lot of it is actually skewed because of Obama. And, because he inherited like the great financial recession, and he saw a lot of growth there. And then same with Biden during COVID, they saw a lot. So it's skewed.
Well, it started from a crash. It started from the bottom.
Yeah,
right?
so there's a little bit of skew that we have to think about when we throw out these numbers. But I think if we're thinking about now, the recent rate cut was very significant. It was significant not because the rate cut happened, but because the rate cut was bigger than people expected, right? So then immediately you saw the market reacting that day. The week after, it was quite a good week. So that's like a sign of confidence from the Fed. Now, I think that there's some discussion that maybe people are saying the Fed overextended. They got a little too over-optimistic. But in general, anyway, for what it's worth, it's a positive sign from the Fed. Then you have Trump coming in, 99%, right, as of now. Trump coming in, who is promising specific cuts, especially some of the corporate cuts, I think, will be good for small and medium businesses, right? And so I think what we're probably heading into a relatively positive macroeconomic situation. Now, with the stock market, it's not science, right? Like at some point, if the sentiment changes where people believe these policies aren't working or this is not good for the long-term health, then of course people, then it will go down, right? So this is not financial advice at all, and I don't know the longer term, but I do think in the short term, the macroeconomy is performing positively as demonstrated by the Fed having the confidence to cut more than they expected. Trump coming in with certain key tax cuts that will help. Some of the things that he's doing probably won't help, like, he's talking a lot about tariffs on Chinese imports, things like that, which probably won't help the economy. But I think all things considered, in the short term, it probably is a positive move. I think that's what you're seeing now, that the market is reacting that way. So it'll probably continue that way for, my guess in the short term, something like that.
Will you be adding, okay, let's say if you have, like, let's say $10,000 this month, right? Will you be adding more towards the US stock pocket or the crypto portfolio?
Right now?
Yeah, for you.
If I had to pick one,
Yeah.
I think I'd pick crypto.
Interesting.
I think I'd go crypto. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the, who knows, right? But I think there'll be a lot of like excitement. Trump getting elected, he has not made his policies very clear, right? So there's a lot of like, a lot of positive anticipation. Whereas I think the stock market, it's already pricing in a lot of things. And then as he makes things more clear and the costs of those things come out and the pros and cons come out, I think it won't be as much positive anticipation as in crypto.
I hope I think the best case scenario is if Trump starts, if the US starts to buy more Bitcoin.
Which they said they would, right?
Which he said they will.
Which Trump said they would.
And then it'll be time for me to upgrade my Kalia. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.